Not bad. All right. I'm going to switch over now, everybody. We're going to do something special. It's 10 minutes of 8. And that was a rather long reading. I hope it wasn't too pedantic or didactic or anything like that. And there's even more, really. You can tell I'm sort of leaving some things off. But I want to switch over, start something nice and warm and cozy tonight. We're going to go into Fiction Friday. And I want to do something special tonight. In addition to doing a reading of a short story, I'm going to play some video cuts from the Robert E. Howard Foundation, because yesterday was the 120th birthday of Robert E. Howard. So we're going to talk about Robert E. Howard. We're going to go to Fantastic Fiction and show a little bit of Robert E. Howard. I've talked about him before. I edited a book for Borderlands Press of short stories of Robert E. Howard, short horror stories. And it's time for us to check out the former Star Trek Writing Fellow channel. If you like to hop over there, I hope you like what we're doing, sort of changing things up, doing the politics and economics and philosophy and news, and then breaking things off and doing something hopefully that people find a nice release valve. Let's talk a little bit of the Liberty Conspiracy, now turning into, of course, the former Star Trek Writing Fellow, Outer Limits, Control Voice. Television, short stories.
There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling transmission. If we wish to make it louder, we will bring up the volume. If we wish to make it softer, we will tune it to a whisper. We will control the horizontal. We will control the vertical. We can roll the image, make it flutter. We can change the focus to a soft blur, or sharpen it to crystal clarity. For the next hour, sit quietly and we will control all that you see and hear. We repeat, there is nothing wrong with your television set. You are about to participate in a great adventure. You are about to experience the awe and mystery which reaches from the inner mind to the outer limits.
All right. Excellent stuff. And again, I hope that wasn't too long a reading from the economic side of things. But now I'm going to settle in, get some marshmallows, toast them over the fire. Got a storm coming in along the upper eastern seaboard of the United States, maybe up towards Nova Scotia, Maine, all the way from maybe New Jersey, New York, Maryland, on through. So we're expecting to straight on through to the other side. It's going to be pretty intense, I guess, starting Sunday night into Monday. So hopefully we'll be together on Monday. And I was going to have a guest on tonight. She's a very nice woman who is a writer, and she did a children's book. We're going to hopefully have her on next week. She actually got a really bad case of poison ivy, she mentioned to me. So we're letting her rest a little bit. And then we were going to have her on tonight, but I was so filled up with stuff. I said, you know what, let's just do it next week. So now it's time to switch over from Liberty Conspiracy to former Star Trek Writing Fellow. I met many people in my script writing work at the Outer Limits and at Star Trek who were big fans of fantasy and science fiction, obviously. And one of the big writers who got mentioned a great deal, to use the passive voice, was Robert E. Howard. And it just so happens that yesterday, the 22nd day of January, 2026, was his 120th birth anniversary. There you go, 1906 to 1936. Now, Robert E. Howard, as we know, was almost a professional boxer. He hunted, he fished, he traipsed all over Texas, and he was a voracious reader. And he created Conan the Barbarian, Brack, and many other very, very well-known characters like Kull. And as we know, Arnold Schwarzenegger was in the Conan movie. People have been wondering whether it'll come back. So it's made its way into movies and television shows and things like that, comic books, some really wonderful comics from Marvel. And I would say that Robert E. Howard, especially after the research I did to edit the book for Borderlands Press and Tom Monteleone, it would be considered the king of pulp writing. H.P. Lovecraft, the king of maybe horror pulp writing. And then you have other people who were associated with them, and people like Robert Bloch or Algernon Blackwood or August Derleth and some of the others from the late 1800s into the early 1900s and right on through to the 1950s and 60s with some of the new science fiction that really started to prop up. Now, with that stated, I want to go over to a little bit about Robert E. Howard, and I want to do something special for you. I'm not going to read a Robert E. Howard story tonight. I'm going to let some very special booktubers read some of his poetry to you. And I want you to get a sample of what Robert E. Howard was like as a child in Texas and the way he describes his love of reading. It's wonderful. So as you'll see, some of the pulp fiction of the short-lived Texan Robert E. Howard are straightforward westerns or historical romance. They write at fantastic fiction. His contribution to the history of fantasy was to realize that setting his stories of ruthless, hard men in Atlantis or a mythical age shortly after its fall enabled him to write without the trammels of historical accuracy. His Conan stories feature a young barbarian warrior who carves himself a kingdom and rules with a degree of wisdom and justice. They are notable for their violent energy. In one of the films with Arnold Schwarzenegger, there's a moment when Conan, crucified by an enemy, bites out the throat of a vulture that gets too close too soon. And it is worth pointing out that this, unlike most of the film, is pure, unadulterated Howard. Howard's early death, yes, he committed suicide when his mother passed away. He couldn't handle it. Well, of course, that was brought up, and people tried to carry on his legacy. He used to communicate a great deal with H.P. Lovecraft, and many other people followed him, folks like Poole Anderson and others. Clark Ashton Smith wrote to him a lot, and there was a circle of people who would pick up on the Lovecraft stories, the Cthulhu mythos. Robert E. Howard wrote in that mythos, as did Clark Ashton Smith and Robert Bloch and many others, August Derleth. And so Robert E. Howard is considered essentially the father of sword and sorcery. The term sword and sorcery coming after he passed away, as Clark Ashton Smith and Michael Moorcock were communicating with each other, and it came through their communication, the term sword and sorcery, as opposed to epic high fantasy. And as I wrote in the introduction for the Borderlands collection, I noted that he not only is considered the father of sword and sorcery and one of the kings of the pulps, he also is really one of the first to be sort of a leading figure in fandom, because he was a fan of other people, such as August Derleth was a fan of Arthur Conan Doyle and then ended up creating Solar Ponds, right? And then other people picked up Solar Ponds. Well, Robert E. Howard was a big fan of, people like H.P. Lovecraft and people like, creator of Tarzan. What's his name? The creator of Tarzan. What's this? Hold on a second. Edgar Rice Burroughs. So I want to turn to the people at the Robert E. Howard Foundation. And while I do it, I want to mention that if you've been watching BookTube, if you've been watching or going on to some of the auction sites on eBay, that sort of thing, and checking out books, and I keep getting ads for eBay that pop up with weird stuff that I don't want. I keep having to click. No, I don't want that weird figurine. Get rid of that. I don't know if the same thing happens to you, like that weird ad stuff that was coming up on YouTube last week. That was very strange. And I know some of you saw those things on your YouTube feed too. Like, what is this stuff? Well, Robert E. Howard's work is starting to get a lot wider recognition in literary circles. And it's almost traveling the same path as H.P. Lovecraft's work did. Moving from being considered, he's just a pulp writer, to people actually looking at the content saying, wow, this is amazing. This is really good writing. Really good. And so let's turn. Before I read a short story, I want to turn to the good people at the Robert E. Howard Foundation, which I think, and by the way, they take contributions, and they're trying to maintain Robert E. Howard's house in Texas, where his family lived, and his letters and his books. They've been putting out wonderful stuff, and I want to get some of them on the show to talk about what they're doing, maybe generate some contributions to them, that sort of thing. I think they're starting to get a lot more recognition, and I think it's wonderful. So let's turn now to this from the Robert E. Howard Foundation. We're going to go through a few segments, skip through a few, but I really want you to hear some of his background and some of this amazing poetry and some of the scenes and openings of stories.
Hello, and welcome to the Robert E. Howard Foundation channel. Today we are presenting a very special video in honor of Robert E. Howard's birthday, which is tomorrow, January 22nd. This year, 2026, will be Bob's 120th birthday. Every year for his birthday, Howard fans have a tradition of wishing Bob a happy birthday and then reading one or more of his stories or poems. We've usually posted these wishes in emails, chat groups, Facebook, Twitter, or X, or on our blogs. This year, since we have this YouTube channel, we thought we would get a bunch of us Howard fans, longtime fans, and newly joined fans to make some videos carrying on the tradition. We hope you will enjoy them and join with us on Bob's birthday, January 22nd, to wish him a very happy one and to thank him for all the hours of enjoyment his work has given you. To start off, I thought I would read most of a letter that Bob wrote to Farnsworth Wright, the editor of Weird Tales, when Farnsworth had sent him a letter asking Bob to give a brief autobiography of himself for the Weird Tales readers.
Now, I want to pause it there. This man's name is John Bullard, B-U-L-L-A-R-D, and I hope that the people at the Robert E. Howard Foundation don't mind me playing this, because this is going to end up getting reproduced at my former Star Trek Writing Fellow channel. So I do want to pause it occasionally, invite some of your comments in a moment about, you know, your favorite books. If you like Robert E. Howard, maybe what your favorite character is, your favorite story. If you've seen the Conan movies, you can even talk about that. But I do want to mention, wait till you hear this letter. It's a wonderful thing. And please consider checking out the Robert E. Howard Foundation and seeing what they're producing, because I think, especially if you're a fan of wonderful writing, I think you'd be pretty happy.
This letter was written around June or July of 1931. To Farnsworth Wright, circa June, July 1931. In your last letter, you asked me to give you some information about myself. Well, it is risky to get a writer talking about himself. Ask him to give a brief resume of accomplishments, and he's very likely to inflict his whole biography and philosophy on you. Well, my tale is soon told. I come from old pioneer stock. By nationality, I am predominantly Gaelic, in spite of my English name. Some 3/4 Irish, while the rest is a mixture of English, Highland, Scotch, and Danish. I was born in a little fading ex-cow town about 30 miles west of Fort Worth. Practically all my life has been spent in the country in some of the Texas cities. I have only a high school education, and not a particularly elaborate one at that. Like the average man, the tale of my life would merely be a dull narration of drab monotony and toil, a grinding struggle against poverty. I have spent most of my time in the bad, barren, semi-wastelands of western Texas, and since infancy, my memory holds a continuous grinding round of crop failures, sandstorms, droughts, floods, hot winds that withered the corn, hailstorms that ripped the grain to pieces, late blizzards that froze the crops in the bud, plagues of grasshoppers and boll weevils, and that stripped the cotton. I remember year-long droughts, and that killed the very mesquite trees, when the streams were dry and the cattle ate cactus until their mouths and bellies were full of the spines, and then lay down and died when even the cactus was gone. My boyhood was spent in the oil country, or rather oil came into the country when I was still a young boy and remained. I'll say one thing about an oil boom. It will teach a kid that life's a pretty rotten thing, about as quick as anything I can think of. I've worked at several jobs, but wasn't a success at any of them. I've picked cotton, helped to brand a few yearlings, hauled a little garbage, worked in a grocery store, ditto in a Jewish dry goods store, worked in a law office, jerked soda, worked in a gas office, tried to be a public stenographer, packed a surveyor's rod, worked up oil field news for some Texas and Oklahoma papers, etc., etc., and also etc. I've always had a honing to make my living by writing ever since I can remember, and while I haven't been a howling success in that line, at least I've managed for several years now to get by without grinding at some time clock punching job. There's freedom in this game. That's the main reason I chose it. As Service says, in belly pinch I will pay the price, but God let me be free. For once I know in the long ago they made a slave of me. Life's not worth living if somebody thinks he's in authority over you. You gave me my start in the racket by buying my first story, Spear and Fang. I was 18 years old at the time. Pounding out a decent living at the writing game is no snap, but the average man's life is no snap, whatever he does. I'm merely one of a huge army, all of whom are bucking the line one way or another for meat for their bellies, which is the main basic principle and reason and habitual goal of life. Every now and then, one of us finds the going too hard and blows his brains out, but it's all in the game, I reckon. And after all, even the bitterness of existence has certain compensations, slight though they may be. To be brought up in the lap of luxury, to live a life of idle pleasure, never to know the bite of cold, the sting of heat, the pangs of hunger, the agony of unceasing toil, the black bitterness of failure, the sordidities of poverty, the blood, the grime, and the sweat. To live such a life is to miss the full grip of human realities. The best way a man can live is by hard slugging, and the best way he can die is with his boots on. Well, I started to tell you something about myself, but there's so little to tell, I'm rather at a loss as to what to say. I've been working at the writing racket pretty regularly since the age of 15 and hope eventually to get somewhere. It's a game I honestly love, and the praise the readers have been kind enough to give me in the Erie has given me an immense amount of sincere pleasure. And there, I believe, is about all the information I can give about a very humdrum and commonplace life. Now that you've heard a little from the man himself about his life and work, here are his fans wishing him a happy birthday.
The Ghost Kings by Robert E. Howard. Happy birthday, Bob. The Ghost Kings are marching. The midnight knows their tread from the distant, stealthy planets of the dim, unstable dead. There are whisperings on the night winds, and the shuddering stars have fled. A ghostly trumpet echoes from the barren mountainhead. Through the fen, the wandering witch lights gleam like phantom arrows sped. There is silence in the valleys, and the moon is rising red. The Ghost Kings are marching down the age's dusty maze. The unseen feet are tramping through the moonlight's pallid haze, down the hollow, clanging stairways of a million yesterdays. The Ghost Kings are marching where the vague moon vapor creeps, while the night wind in their coming like a thunderous herald sweeps. They are clad in ancient grandeur, but the world unheeding sleeps. Happy 120th birthday, Robert E. Howard. That one was from Weird Tales in December 1938. It's not bad for a guy who had died 2 years before.
Now, before I continue, I just want to mention, sometimes as people are reading the poems, some will be a little better than others and so on and so forth. And sometimes as a listener, it's easy to become maybe not participatory, maybe zone out a little bit. There are a couple times here that I really, really hope you hear the incredible beauty of some of the things that are read by some of these folks, and the personal story of this man's just adoration for fiction, for stories, and for colorful writing, for history and reading. Just wonderful, wonderful stuff, especially in this time of electronics when screens are in front of people's faces. Think about this. Think about, as you listen to some of these things, think about maybe what it might have been like when you were a kid. And if you had the same experience I did, where if you can orient yourself as you're listening to this, maybe orient yourself towards the southwest. Look at the sky. Think about, orient yourself with the North Star, and just sit back and listen to these wherever you are in your house. Get the feng shui right and just kick back and check this out. The words of a guy who desperately loved writing and really did an amazing job with so many of his creations, and provided. And for a long time, I couldn't read his stuff because I knew what he had done to his own life. But while that is sad and it's important to reflect on it, I also want to appreciate the amazing, exceptionally amazing work of this man. It really is remarkable.
Thank you for so many years of wonderful stories and adventures, Robert E. Howard. You are the finest pulp writer that ever was and probably ever will be. And it's an absolute honor to be able to contribute even the tiniest bit to your legacy. As part of the celebration for your birthday this year, a bunch of us are doing readings from different stories and poems that we find very inspiring. And so I'm going to read a small section here from God in the Bowl. It's one of the most interesting paced kind of Conan stories, but also one of my favorites because it builds this kind of simmering tension page after page until it all explodes in this section here.
This is really awesome. Watch this.
I am about to read to you. All right. Enough of this, growled Dionys, eyeing the silent Cimmerian. The prefect lifted his hand. Conan's eyes began to burn bluely, and a tension crackled in the air when an interruption came. A guardsman entered, dragging a slender, richly dressed figure. I saw him slinking about the back of the temple, quoth the guard, looking for commendation. Instead, he received curses that lifted his hair. Release that gentleman, you bungling fool, swore the prefect. Don't you know Astrius Britannius, the nephew of the city's governor? The abashed guard fell away, and the foppish young nobleman brushed his embroidered sleeve fastidiously. Save your apologies, good Dionys, he lisped affectedly. All in the line of duty, I know. I was returning from a late revel and walking to rid my brain of the wine fumes. What have we here? By Mitra, is it murder? Murder it is, my lord, answered the prefect, but we have a man who, though Demetrio seems to have doubts on the matter, will doubtless go to the stake for it. A vicious-looking brute, murmured the young aristocrat. How can any doubt his guilt? I have never seen such a villainous countenance before. Yes, you have, you scented dog, snarled the Cimmerian, when you hired me to steal the Zamorian goblet for you. Revels, eh? Bah! You were waiting in the shadows for me to hand you the goblet. I would not have revealed your name if you had given me fair words. Now tell these dogs what you saw me climb the wall after the watchman made the last round, so that they'll know I didn't have time to kill this fat swine before Arius entered and found the body. Demetrio quickly looked at Astrius, who did not change color. If what he says is true, my lord, said the inquisitor, it clears him of the murder, and we can easily hush up the matter of attempted theft. He is due 10 years hard labor for housebreaking. But if you say the word will arrange for him to escape, and none of us will ever know anything about it. I understand you wouldn't be the first nobleman who had to resort to such things to pay gambling debts and the like. You can rely on our discretion. Conan looked at the young noble expectantly, but Astrius shrugged his slender shoulders and covered a yawn with a delicate white hand. I know him not, he answered. He is mad to say I hired him. Let him take his just deserts. He has a strong back, and the toil in the mines will be well for him. Conan's eyes blazed, and he started as if stung. The guards tensed, grasping their bills, then relaxed as he dropped his head suddenly, as if in sullen resignation. And not even Demetrio could tell that he was watching them from under his heavy black brows, with eyes that were slits of blue balefire. He struck with no more warning than a striking cobra. His sword flashed in the candlelight. Astrius shrieked, and his head flew from his shoulders in a shower of blood, the features frozen in a white mask of horror. Cat-like, Conan wheeled and thrust murderously for Demetrio's groin. The Inquisitor's instinctive recoil barely deflected the point which sank into his thigh, glanced from the bone and plowed out through the outer side of the leg. Demetrio went to his knee with a groan, unnerved and nauseated with agony. Conan had not paused. The bill which Dionys flung up saved the prefect's skull from the whistling blade, which turned slightly as it cut through the shaft and sheared his ear cleanly from his head. The blinding speed of the barbarian paralyzed the senses of the police and made their actions futile gestures. Caught flat-footed and dazed by his quickness and ferocity, half of them would have been down before they had a chance to fight back, except that posthumo, more by luck than skill, threw his arms about the Cimmerian, pinioning his sword arm. Conan's left hand leapt to the guard's head, and Posthumo fell away and writhed, shrieking on the floor, clutching a gaping red socket where an eye had been. Conan bounded from the waving bills, and his leap carried him outside the ring of his foes to where Arius stood fumbling at his crossbow. A savage kick in the belly dropped him, green-faced and gagging, and Conan's sandaled heel crunched square in the watchman's mouth. The wretch screamed through a ruin of splintered teeth, blowing bloody froth from his mangled lips. Man, oh man. Nobody does it like Howard. That action, that energy, that explosion of it's so amazing. And it's the kind of stuff that summons just the most imaginative and amazing imagery in my mind. And that kind of stuff just inspires me. It inspires me when I write, and it inspires me when I think about, the verbiage and the poetry I try and put into the narration in the official Conan comics. So again, thanks for letting me be part of this, and may your swords be ever sharp.
So, happy birthday to Robert E. Howard. I don't know of any other pulp writer that wrote so well in so many different genres. And I'm not really a horror fan, but I read his horror stories. And I don't read H. Rider Haggard, but I read his adventure stories. And I don't do much historical fiction, but I read his Viking stories and his Crusader stories. And of course, there's Conan, there's Elborak, there's his Westerns, there's Solomon Kane. Of all the pulp writers, whether it's Dashiell Hammett or Hamilton or any genre, Robert E. Howard was excelling in almost all of them. Boxing stories? Let's go read some Sailor Steve Costigan. Robert E. Howard is one of the greatest American writers that we've had. And the fact that he was pulp does not diminish what he accomplished. So whether you're discovering new things, you're rereading Conan for the 10th time, Robert E. Howard is a great writer. And he's also got a community that's formed around him that are a lot of like-minded people that appreciate his work. And then we like talking about him, and we like talking with each other about him. So I think the fact that Robert Howard brings us together 120 years from his birthday is amazing. And I'm just glad to be a part of this community. So happy birthday to Robert E. Howard.
I would like to wish the happiest of birthdays to Bob Howard, January 22nd. I'm going to celebrate by referring to Bobby Deary's Robert E. Howard Bar Guide. I think I might make a toast with a Pabst Blue Ribbon. For a special event, I am going to share a musical version of one of Robert E. Howard's poems. It's going to be a song form of the chant demoniac. And if you don't know the poem, I'll recite it here. I am Satan, I am weary, for my road is long and hard. I ride through regions dreary, since the golden gates were barred. I wait by the flaming gates. I give men death, and they give me hate. I am Satan, never resting, for the scourge is at my back. Yonder soul his crimes attesting, to the fire, to the rack. Yet another and another will this tally never cease. Turn from sin, I beg, my brother. Give a weary demon peace. I am Satan, I am weary by the ever-flaming sea, ye who tread my regions dreary. Sinners, sinners, pity me. So I look forward to sharing that in song. Happiest of birthdays to Bob Howard. Thank you so much. I am a latecomer to Bob Howard in a lot of ways. Growing up, Conan was omnipresent in my life. And it wasn't until my 40s, so about a decade now, that I've actually just dived in and discovered and enjoyed the community that celebrates Bob. Happy birthday, Bob. Thanks for everything that you've introduced to my life.
A wild moon rode the wide white clouds, the waves in white crests flowed, when Solomon Kane went forth again, and no man knew his road. They glimpsed him etched against the moon, where clouds on hilltops thinned. They heard an eerie echoed call that whistled down the wind. Happy birthday, Robert E. Howard. Thank you for all the wonderful stories. You madman, you.
Well, in honor of Howard's birthday, I chose The Frost Giant's Daughter. Somehow, this story, and I still don't know how, was rejected by Farnsworth Wright, but to me, it's one of the best Conan stories. I describe it as savage poetry in the cold north. And it feels like myth, and in a sense it was adapted from the Greek myth of Daphne and Apollo. But to me, it feels like northern myth, a Valkyrie gone bad, not collecting the bodies of the slain, but instead leading them to their deaths. You can find a terrific adaptation in Savage Sword of Conan #1 by Roy Thomas and Barry Windsor Smith, if you're lucky enough to own one, and I happen to have one right here. But for this video, I'm going to read the first 2 paragraphs from the original unpublished story from my Del Rey, of course. So here we are, the first 2 paragraphs, of The Frost Giant's Daughter. The clangor of the swords had died away. The shouting of the slaughter was hushed. Silence lay on the red-stained snow. The bleak pale sun that glittered so blindingly from the ice fields and the snow-covered plains struck sheens of silver from rent corselet and broken blade where the dead lay as they had fallen. The nerveless hand yet gripped the broken hilt, helmeted heads back-drawn from the death throes, tilted red beards and golden beards grimly upward, as if in last invocation to Ymir the frost giant, god of a warrior race. Across the red drifts and mail-clad forms, 2 figures glared at each other. In that utter desolation, only they moved. The frosty sky was over them, the white, illimitable plain around them, the dead men at their feet. Slowly through the corpses they came, as ghosts might come to a tryst through the shambles of a dead world. In the brooding silence, they stood face to face. That's poetry. So happy birthday, Bob. Your soul lives on in a literary Valhalla.
Happy birthday, Howard Heads. We've been lucky to have the work of Robert E. Howard in all of our lives, uniting people from around the world for well over a century. It was the birthing cry of sword and sorcery, a genre I am quite fond of. And he's created such an impressive body of work spanning from boxing stories to fantasy to poetry. And I hope all of you will take the time today to savor just a little bit of that. Whether you be a longtime reader of Robert E. Howard or someone just beginning to take the plunge. And at least on his birthday, I'd like to share one of my favorite works of his, a poem that will be appearing in the first issue of my magazine, Battle, by the title, The Road of Kings. When I was a fighting man, the kettle drums they beat. The people scattered gold dust before my horse's feet. But now I am a great king. The people hound my track, with poison in my wine cup and daggers at my back. Gleaming shell of an outworn lie, fable of right divine. You gained your crowns by heritage, but blood was the price of mine. The throne that I won by blood and sweat, by crom I will not sell. For promise of valleys filled with gold or threat of the halls of hell. What do I know of the cultured ways, the guilt, the craft, and the lie? I, who was born in a naked land and bred in the open sky. The subtle tongue, the sophist guile, they fail when broadswords swing. Rush in and die, dogs. I was a man before I was a king.
Awesome.
Hey, Jeff Shanks here. Good to see everybody. We're here celebrating Bob Howard's birthday. As many of you know, it's often a tradition for those of us that are big Howard fans to.
So I'm going to just hop over Mr. Shanks just real quick because I want to get over to this woman. I want to show you this woman. She's got a terrific channel. And then finally, we're going to finish off with Bobby Deary, who's an Robert E. Howard scholar. But Andrea of Infinite Text, this is a terrific channel that Andrea does at Infinite Text. So here we go with Andrea, starting things up.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Andrea. I'm relatively new to Robert T. Howard, but so far I have loved every single thing I've read by him. He's extraordinary. And I thought for his birthday, I would read a short poem that he's written called Black Seas. And this is from the book Shadows of Dreams, and it's poetry by Robert T. Howard and pictures by Richard Berry. And I'm going to try to put a few on the screen. I also have his little friend, H.P. Lovecraft, here for emotional support. So I'm going to read it now. Black Seas. I have heard black seas booming in the night on dim, uncharted shores beneath the stars, with reefs that never gleamed to mortal sight and winds that never hastened man-hewn spars. I waver on the threshold of my choice, O silver stars that gleam in oceans black, for through the night there sounds a nameless voice, who ride the dusky seas, they come not back. Happy birthday, Bob.
Hey, this is Bobby Deary. I'm a member of the board of the Robert E. Howard Foundation, author of Weird Tailors, Essays on Robert E. Howard and Others, and several other books. And I'm here to wish Robert E. Howard a happy birthday. I'd like to read to you a selection from one of his letters to H.P. Lovecraft. As a boy and a youth in my teens, I read purely for the love of reading. I can say with confidence that no man, however mature, ever loved reading for its own sake more than I. I did not read because of any particular urge for learning, or to merely pass the time, or to escape the realities of life. I read simply because I loved reading for its own sake alone. The printed page was like wine to me. Books were scarce in the country. I could not go into a library or bookstore and select what I wanted. I had to read whatever came to my hand, and I did, and generally enjoyed it supremely. Perhaps that accounts in part for my still rather indiscriminate taste. If I had tried to pick and choose in my early youth, damned little I'd have ever read. I was not critical. I never tried to analyze what I read. I was simply and sincerely grateful for whatever chance put into my hands. Often I would read a book through and without pausing, turn back to the first and read it through again, sometimes repeating this 3 or 4 times. As a youngster, I would sometimes skip a paragraph here and there in order to thrill over its newness when I reread it. My own library was generally the largest in the place I lived, but it was small. I generally was given a book on Christmas and on my birthday. Occasionally, between times, a book was bought. For the rest, I borrowed whenever I could. My main source of reading material were the handmade bookcases which served for libraries in the country schools. Each tiny school had one, and the contents were small but varied. In the summer, I regularly raided these libraries. During the long summer vacations, which usually lasted 6 or 7 months, schools and bookcases were kept locked and barred. Then I made my raids. Occasionally, I could obtain the key and permission to read the books so guarded. But refusal did not halt me. In my passionate quest for reading material, nothing could have halted me but a bullet through the head. With a flour sack tied to my saddle horn, I raided isolated schoolhouses far up the creeks, in the hills, and in villages. I jimmied the doors or windows of the buildings and pried the locks off the solidly made bookcases. If that failed, I removed the hinges. Then with my flour sack saddlebag full of books, I departed in a cloud of dust, oblivious to the maledictions sometimes directed my way. I did not steal these books. I always returned them in as good a shape as I took them. But I had to read, and I did read, even in the teeth of threats to have the law on me. It was a matter beyond my control. Literature of one sort or another was meat and drink and the wine of life to me. Robert E. Howard to H.P. Lovecraft, 15 June, 1933. And, you know, Robert E. Howard was probably exaggerating a little. He was a Texan. He liked to tell tall tales. But there is something in that paragraph I've always loved. It's just the way he tells a story, the way he expresses that emotion, that need for knowledge. His love of reading comes through more strongly in that page of text, in that long letter, than in anything else he ever wrote. And I love it. So, Bob, I hope there's a library in heaven.
All right, so we'll stop it right there. And, I was going to read a different short story by somebody else, but I decided while I was playing this, let's stick with the Robert E. Howard theme. And I'm going to go to the Little Bronze Book of Weird Tales from Borderlands Books that I got to edit for Tom Monteleone a couple years ago. And I wrote the introduction for it and things like that. And you can see they're small books. They're numbered. They have a certain number of the books inside them, and so there's a limited number of them, and so on. So they have these colors. If you go to Borderlands Press, you'll see the little book series. They have all sorts of great ones. Saki and Robert Louis Stevenson, Edgar Allan Poe, and all sorts of great ones. So this is, of course, a Little Bronze Book of Weird Tales by Robert E. Howard. And this is the story called The Thing on the Roof, first published in Weird Tales, February 1932. And it has this as an opening. It's a bit of a poem by Justin Joffrey. And it says, "They lumber through the night with their elephantine tread. I shudder in affright as I cower in my bed. They lift colossal wings on the high gable roofs, which tremble to the trample of their mastodonic hoofs." Ooh, what are they? And that is Justin Joffrey, Out of the Old Land. Sort of like the old ones from Cthulhu, of course. So, The Thing on the Roof by Robert E. Howard. Let me begin by saying that I was surprised when Tussman called on me. We had never been close friends. The man's mercenary instincts repelled me. And since our bitter controversy of 3 years before, when he attempted to discredit my evidences of Nahura culture in Yucatan, which was the result of years of careful research, our relations had been anything but cordial. However, I received him and found his manner hasty and abrupt, but rather abstracted, as if his dislike for me had been thrust aside and in some driving passion that had a hold on him, he had come to me. His errand was quickly stated. He wished my aid in obtaining a volume in the first edition of von Junst's Nameless Cults, the edition known as the Black Book, not from its color, but because of its dark contents. He might almost as well have asked me for the original Greek translation of the Necronomicon, though since my return from Yucatan, I had devoted practically all my time to my avocation of book collecting. I had not stumbled onto any hint that the book in the Dusseldorf edition was still in existence. A word as to this rare work. Its extreme ambiguity in spots, coupled with its incredible subject matter, has caused it long to be regarded as the ravings of a maniac, and the author was damned with the brand of insanity. But the fact remains that much of his assertions are unanswerable, and that he spent the full 45 years of his life prying into strange places and discovering secret and abysmal things. Not a great many volumes were printed in the first edition, and many of these were burned by their frightened owners when von Junst was found strangled in a mysterious manner in his barred and bolted chamber one night in 1840, 6 months after he had returned from a mysterious journey to Mongolia. 5 years later, a London printer, one Bridewall, pirated the work and issued a cheap translation for a sensational effect, full of grotesque woodcuts and riddled with misspellings, faulty translations, and the usual errors of a cheap and unscholarly printing. This still further discredited the original work, and publishers and public forgot about the book until 1909, when the Golden Goblin Press of New York brought out an edition. Their production was so carefully expurgated that fully a fourth of the original matter was cut out. The book was handsomely bound and decorated with the exquisite and weirdly imaginative illustrations of Diego Vasquez. The edition was intended for popular consumption, but the artistic instinct of the publishers defeated that end, since the cost of issuing the book was so great that they were forced to cite it at a prohibitive price. I was explaining all this to Tussman when he interrupted brusquely to say that he was not utterly ignorant in such matters. One of the Golden Goblin books ornamented his library, he said, and it was in it that he found a certain line which aroused his interest. If I could procure him a copy of the original 1839 edition, he would make it worth my while, knowing, he added, that it would be useless to offer me money, and he would instead, in return for my trouble on his behalf, make a full retraction of his former accusations in regard to my Yucatan researches and offer a complete apology in the Scientific News. I will admit that I was astonished at this and realized that if the matter meant so much to Tussman that he was willing to make such concessions, it must indeed be of the utmost importance. I answered that I considered that I had sufficiently refuted his charges in the eyes of the world and had no desire to put him in a humiliating position, but that I would make the utmost efforts to procure him what he wanted. He thanked me abruptly and took his leave, saying rather vaguely that he hoped to find a complete exposition of something in the Black Book which had evidently been slighted in the later edition. I set to work, writing letters to friends, colleagues, and book dealers all over the world, and soon discovered that I had assumed a task of no small magnitude. 3 months elapsed before my efforts were crowned with success, but at last, through the aid of Professor James Clement of Richmond, Virginia, I was able to obtain what I wished. I notified Tussman, and he came to London by the next train. His eyes burned avidly as he gazed at the thick, dusty volume with its heavy leather covers and rusty iron hasps, and his fingers quivered with eagerness as he thumbed the time-yellowed pages. And when he cried out fiercely and smashed his clenched fist on the table, I knew that he had found what he hunted. "Listen," he commanded, and he read to me a passage that spoke of an old temple in a Honduras jungle where a strange god was worshipped by an ancient tribe which became extinct before the coming of the Spaniards. And Tussman read aloud of the mummy that had been in life the last high priest of that vanished people, and which now lay in a chamber hewn in the solid rock of the cliff against which the temple had been built. About that mummy's withered neck was a copper chain, and on that chain a great red jewel carved in the form of a toad. This jewel was a key, von Juntz went on to say, to the treasure of the temple, which lay hidden in a subterranean crypt far below the temple's altar. Tussman's eyes blazed. "I have seen that temple. I stood before the altar. I have seen the sealed-up entrance of the chamber in which, the natives say, lies the mummy of the priest. It is a very curious temple. No more like the ruins of the prehistoric Indians than it is like the buildings of the modern Latin Americans. The Indians in the vicinity disclaim any former connection with the place. They say that people who built that temple, the people who built that temple were a different race from themselves and were there when their own ancestors came into the country. I believe it to be a remnant of some long-vanished civilization which began to decay thousands of years before the Spaniards came. I would have liked to have broken into the sealed-up chamber, but I had neither the time nor the tools for the task. I was hurrying to the coast, having been wounded by an accidental gunshot in the foot, and I stumbled onto the place purely by chance. I've been planning to have another look at it, but circumstances have prevented. Now I intend to let nothing stand in my way. By chance, I came upon a passage in the Golden Goblin edition of this book describing the temple, but that was all. The mummy was only briefly mentioned. Interested, I obtained one of Bridewell's translations, but ran up against a blank wall of baffling blunders. By some irritating mischance, the translator had even mistaken the location of the Temple of the Toad, as von Juntz calls it, and has it in Guatemala instead of Honduras. The general description is faulty. The jewel is mentioned, and the fact that it is a key, but a key to what? Bridewell's book does not state. I now felt I was on the right track of a real discovery, unless von Juntz was, as many maintain, a madman. But the man was actually in Honduras at one time, and that has been well attested. And no one could so vividly describe the temple as he does in the Black Book unless he had seen it himself. How he learned of the jewel is more than I can say. The Indians who told me of the mummy said nothing of any jewel. I can only believe that von Juntz found his way into the sealed crypt somehow. The man had uncanny ways of learning hidden things. To the best of my knowledge, only one other white man has seen the Temple of the Toad beside von Juntz and myself, the Spanish traveler Juan Gonzalez, who made a partial exploration of that country in 1793. He mentioned briefly a curious fane that differed from most Indian ruins and spoke skeptically of a legend current among the natives that there was something unusual hidden deep under the temple. I feel certain that he was referring to the Temple of the Toad. Tomorrow I sail for Central America. Keep the book. I have no more use for it. This time I am going fully prepared, and I intend to find what is hidden in that temple. If I have to demolish it, I will still find what is hidden. It can be nothing less than a great store of gold. The Spaniards missed it somehow when they arrived in Central America. The Temple of the Toad was deserted. They were searching for living Indians from whom torture could wring gold, not for mummies of lost peoples. But I mean to have that treasure. To say Tussman took his departure, so saying, Tussman took his departure. I sat down and opened the book at the place where he had left off reading, and I sat until midnight, wrapped in von Juntz's curious, wild, and at times utterly vague expoundings. And I found, pertaining to the Temple of the Toad, certain things which disquieted me so much that the next morning I attempted to get in touch with Tussman, only to find that he had already sailed. Several months passed, and then I received a letter from Tussman, asking me to come and spend a few days with him at his estate in Sussex. He also requested me to bring the Black Book with me. I arrived at Tussman's rather isolated estate just after nightfall, He lived in an almost feudal state, his great ivy-grown house and broad lawns surrounded by high stone walls. As I went up the hedge-bordered way from the gate to the house, I noted that the place had not been well kept in its master's absence. Weeds grew rank among the trees, almost choking out the grass. Among some unkempt bushes over against the outer wall, I heard what appeared to be a horse or an ox blundering and lumbering about. I distinctly heard the clink of its hoof on a stone. A servant who eyed me suspiciously admitted me, and I found Tussman pacing to and fro in his study like a caged lion. His giant frame was leaner, harder than when I had last seen him. His face was bronzed by a tropic sun. There were more and harsher lines in his strong face, and his eyes burning more intensely than ever. A smoldering, baffled anger seemed to underlie his manner. "Well, Tussman," I greeted him, "what success? Did you find the gold?" "I found not an ounce of gold," he growled. "The whole thing was a hoax. Well, not all of it. I broke into the sealed chamber and found the mummy." "And the jewel?" I exclaimed. He drew something from his pocket and handed it to me. I gazed curiously at the thing I held. It was a great jewel, clear and transparent as crystal, but of a sinister crimson, carved, as von Junst had declared, in the shape of a toad. I shuddered involuntarily. The image was particularly repulsive. I turned my attention to the heavy and curiously wrought copper chain which supported it. "What are all these characters carved on the chain?" I asked curiously. "I cannot say," Tussman replied. "I had thought perhaps you might know. I find a faint resemblance between them and certain partly defaced hieroglyphics on a monolith known as the Black Stone in the mountains of Hungary. I've been unable to decipher them." "Tell me of your trip," I urged, and over our whiskey and sodas he began, as if with a strange reluctance. "I found the temple again with no great difficulty, though it lies in a lonely and little frequented region. The temple is built against a sheer stone cliff in a deserted valley unknown to maps and explorers. I would not endeavor to make an estimate of its antiquity, but it is built of a sort of unusually hard basalt, such as I have never seen anywhere else, and its extreme weathering suggests incredible age. Most of the columns which form its facade are in ruins, thrusting up shattered stumps from worn bases, like the scattered and broken teeth of some grinning hag. The outer walls are crumbled, but the inner walls and the columns which support such of the roof as remains intact, they seem good for another 1,000 years, as well as the walls of the inner chamber. The main chamber is a large circular affair with a floor composed of great squares of stone. In the center stands the altar, merely a huge, round, curiously carved block of the same material. Directly behind the altar, in the solid stone cliff which forms the rear wall of the chamber, is the sealed and hewn-out chamber wherein lay the mummy of the temple's last priest. I broke into the crypt with not much difficulty and found the mummy exactly as is stated in the Black Book. Though it was in a remarkable state of preservation, I was unable to classify it. The withered features and general contour of the skulls suggested certain degraded and mongrel peoples of Lower Egypt, and I feel certain that the priest was a member of a race more akin to the Caucasian than the Indian. Beyond this, I cannot make any positive statement. But the jewel was there, the chain looped about the dried-up neck. From this point, Tussman's narrative became so vague that I had some difficulty in following him and wondered if the tropic sun had affected his mind. He had opened a hidden door in the altar somehow, with the jewel. Just how, he did not plainly say, and it struck me that he did not clearly understand himself the action of the jewel key. But the opening of the secret door had had a bad effect on the hardy rogues in his employ. They had refused point blank to follow him through that gaping black opening, which had appeared so mysteriously when the gem was touched to the altar. Tussman entered alone, with his pistol and electric torch, finding a narrow stone stair that wound down into the bowels of the earth. He followed this and presently came into a broad corridor in the blankness of which his tiny beam of light was almost engulfed. As he told this, he spoke with strange annoyance of a toad which hopped ahead of him, just beyond the circle of light, all the time he was below the ground. Making his way along dank tunnels and stairways that were wells of solid blackness, he at last came to a heavy door fantastically carved, which he felt must be the crypt wherein was secreted the gold of the ancient worshippers. He pressed the toll jewel against it at several places, and finally the door gaped wide. "And the treasure?" I broke in eagerly. He laughed in savage mockery. "There was no gold there, no precious gems, nothing." He hesitated. "Nothing that I could bring away." Again, his tale lapsed into vagueness. I gathered that he had left the temple rather hurriedly, without searching any further for the supposed treasure. He had intended bringing the mummy away with him, he said, to present to some museum. But when he came up out of the pits, it could not be found, and he believed that his men, in superstitious aversion to having such a companion on their road to the coast, had thrown it into some well or cavern. "And so," he concluded, "I am in England again, no richer than when I left." "You have the jewel," I reminded him. "Surely it is valuable." He eyed it without favor, but with a sort of fierce avidness, almost obsessional. "Would you say that it is a ruby?" he asked. I shook my head. "I'm unable to classify it." "And I. But let me see the book." He slowly turned the heavy pages, his lips moving as he read. Sometimes he shook his head as if puzzled, and I noticed him dwell long over a certain line. "This man dipped so deeply into forbidden things," he said. "I cannot wonder that his fate was so strange and mysterious. He must have had some foreboding of his end. Here he warns men not to disturb sleeping things." Tussman seemed lost in thought for some moments. "Aye, sleeping things. Things that seem dead," he muttered, "but only lie waiting for some blind fool to wake them." I should have read further in the black book, and I should have shut the door when I left the crypt, but I have the key, and I'll keep it in spite of hell. He roused himself from his reveries and was about to speak when he stopped short. From somewhere upstairs had come a peculiar sound. "What was that?" He glared at me. I shook my head and ran to the door and shouted for a servant. The man entered a few moments later, and he was rather pale. Were you upstairs? Growled Tussman. Yes, sir. Did you hear anything? Asked Tussman harshly, and in a manner almost threatening and accusing. I did, sir, the man answered with a puzzled look on his face. What did you hear? The question was fairly snarled. Well, sir, the man laughed apologetically. You'll say I'm a bit off, I fear, but to tell you the truth, sir, it sounded like a horse stamping around on the roof. A blaze of absolute madness leaped into Tussman's eyes. You fool, he screamed. Get out of here! The man shrank back in amazement, and Tussman snatched up the gleaming toad-carved jewel. I've been a fool, he raved. I didn't read far enough, and I should have shut the door. But by heaven, the key is mine, and I'll keep it in spite of man or devil. And with these strange words, he turned and fled upstairs. A moment later, his door slammed heavily, and a servant, knocking timidly, brought forth only a blasphemous order to retire and a luridly worded threat to shoot anyone who tried to obtain entrance into the room. Had it not been so late, I would have left the house, for I was certain that Tussman was stark mad. As it was, I retired to the room a frightened servant showed to me. But I did not go to bed. I opened the pages of the Black Book at the place where Tussman had been reading. This much was evident. Unless the man was utterly insane, he had stumbled upon something unexpected in the temple of the toad. Something unnatural about the opening of the altar door had frightened his men, and in the subterraneous crypt, Tussman had found something that he had not thought to find. And I believed that he had been followed from Central America, and that the reason for his persecution was the jewel he called the key. Seeking some clue in von Junz's volume, I read again of the Temple of the Toad, of the strange pre-Indian people who worshipped there, and of the huge, tittering, tentacled, hooved monstrosity that they worshipped. Tussman had said that he had not read far enough when he had first seen the book. Puzzling over this cryptic phrase, I came upon the line he had pored over, marked by his thumbnail. It seemed to me to be another of von Junz's many ambiguities, for it merely stated that a temple's god was the temple's treasure. When the dark implication of the hint struck me, cold sweat beaded my forehead. The key to the treasure, and the temple's treasure, was the temple's god. And sleeping things might awaken on the opening of that prison door. I sprang up, unnerved by the intolerable suggestion, and at that moment something crashed in the stillness, and the death scream of a human being burst upon my ears. In an instant, I was out of the room, and as I dashed up the stairs, I heard sounds that have made me doubt my sanity ever since. At Tussman's door, I halted, essaying with shaking hand to turn the knob. The door was locked, and as I hesitated, I heard from within a hideous, high-pitched tittering, and then the disgusting, squashy sound, as if a great jelly-like bulk was being forced through the window. The sound ceased, and I could have sworn I heard a faint swish of giant wings. Then silence. Gathering my shattered nerves, I broke down the door. A foul and overpowering stench billowed out like a yellow mist. Gasping in nausea, I entered. The room was in ruins, but nothing was missing except that crimson toad-carved jewel Tussman called the key. And that was never found. A foul, unspeakable slime smeared the windowsill, and in the center of the room lay Tussman, his head crushed and flattened, and on the red ruin of skull and face, the plain print of an enormous hoof. That from Robert E. Howard from 1932, The Thing on the Roof. They lumber through the night with their elephantine tread. I shudder in affright as I cower in my bed. They lift colossal wings on the high gable roofs, which tremble to the trample of their mastodonic hoofs. All right. Cool stuff. Robert E. Howard, 120 years old yesterday. And, you know, it's interesting. Like I said, when I was a kid, I didn't read Robert Howard stuff because I knew that he had committed suicide. And so it took me a while to sort of, you know, get to a point where, okay, you know, I'm going to be able to read this and think about his talent, and something must have changed in his life. Maybe he had problems for a while, but I'm not going to try to inject those thoughts into reading the stories. It's not that, oh, you can separate the work from the writer or anything like that. It's just, I'll think that those troubles came to him later, and while he was writing this stuff, he was, you know, doing all right, that sort of thing. And it is interesting because when you see some of the folks at, you know, the Robert E. Howard Foundation, and there are all sorts of great people who are here. You'll see Michael K. Vaughan. Michael K. Vaughan made an appearance. If you're familiar, he's one of the most popular booktubers out there. I love Michael's stuff. He's great. But as you get to know these people who love Robert E. Howard's work and are helping to elevate it to a position of, I think, justified recognition on a literary level, not just popular, but it strikes me that you think about this guy, and there's almost a desperate, there's a vibe among many of the people who really like him. And, you know, they're talking about Bob Howard, Robert E. Howard, that he gave them such enjoyment that you almost get a sense that some of these people, maybe they wish just somehow they could reach back in time and stop him, you know, and somehow save that guy. And that gets you to think about maybe, you know, people in your life or your family. If you've had disagreements with people, you know, that time is so fleeting. It goes by so quickly. And don't let it be too late, you know. And maybe sometimes you can't stop something, but sometimes you can show up, help somebody out. You can do something. If you're a local to your area, you know, you go to your local library, you go to a store, check in, see how somebody's doing, that sort of thing. Old friends, that sort of stuff. It's different now with electronics. People communicate on Facebook, they leave messages and so on. You know, hopefully there's still that draw. Find a club, find a D&D group, find a church, you know, that sort of thing. Frequent an ice cream place once in a while. I have friends at the CVS where I go because I've had to go for medicine so much, you know. Great people over there. Awesome people. So anyway, just wanted to mention that. I'll read more other stuff next week, and we'll have a great time with all the you know, the fiction I'm working on. I've written a little more on that story Fuel, and I'm going through the final revisions of Tower. So we'll get that together. And I'm sorry if it feels like it's a little bit delayed. It's just that, you know, the news stuff that I cover is so dominating, and it's crazy. Like I said, there's always something else that you can cover. And sometimes you get to a point where you say to yourself, gee, you know, I really have got to get this in. I'm going to have to shift this out or do this. So with that, I'm going to do one real quick thing. Before we go, I'm going to give you the Outer Limits end theme for former Star Trek writing fellow. Remember, if this is something that you like, if you like having short stories read to you, and you know that they'll be available at the channel at YouTube or Rumble, you like that, just head on over. You can re-listen to a bunch of the stories that we've read. Hopefully that'll be a good resource for you, and you can play it whenever you want to. It'll always be there, and flubs and all. And, you know, it's not AI that way. And there are a lot of other great book readers out there. There's Quasar Spectra, which is a really good one. Of course, there's Horror Babble. You get great short stories from them. Lots of really good ones. And I'll highlight more as time goes along, more YouTube fiction readers of short stories, and you'll love them. And I'd like, for other folks to hopefully enjoy what I'm doing here too. And these people that I'm going to be promoting are not AI. They're real people, and you can make a nice connection with them on a human soul-to-soul level and realize they're fans also. So with that, I'll just say, from generation to generation, century to century, happy birthday to Robert E. Howard. And we'll take a break for just a second. We'll do our Outer Limits outro, and then we'll do a recap for the End of Liberty Conspiracy on this Fiction Friday, and go through just a couple things that will round off the week that I want to make sure that I play for you, so that I don't forget, and I make sure that I stress some of these things. So here's our little outro for Outer Limits for former Star Trek writing fellow.
We now return control of your television set to you until next week at this same time, when the control voice will take you to the Outer Limits.